Welcome back, you filthy exiles. So a lot of people have been smashing me in the comments for a build guide on what I've been playing in my videos, and I thought I'd finally have something that's a little more finalized and ready to roll. Anyway, as you would have seen, this is a spin to win Sentinel of Purity slash Herald of Agony build. So essentially, just a bit of a precursor before we get into the actual guide and the slides and whatnot that I'll put together with the deets. We'll just hide that so we don't get any funky PoE players typing any shit up in the channel. So basically, how this build works is we are using two primary key skills. We're using Herald of Purity and we're using Herald of Agony. Now, there's a few mechanics which I'll explain when I go into the gearing. But essentially, obviously there's some crazy ass gear. This is not my final chest, but this is a double influence chest. Basically, we're using two key unique items in this build, which is a Circle of Guilt and a Circle of Nostalgia. Both of these I sort of lucked out with, and I got 40% reduced mana reservation and 40% on my Herald of Purity, and my Herald of Agony has 40% reduced mana reservation. This then lets us run a whole slew of other auras, which that essentially buff up our allies, being our Purity Sentinels, or we can call them minions as well, because they're two peas in the same pod. On top of that, we're running Charisma Enchant, and basically this build is built around absolute minimization of mana reservation, so that obviously we can run a 6-link Herald of Purity. Obviously, the more gems that you stack onto this, the more the mana reservation is. As you can see, we're running at 58 mana in the pool, and we're running 2 Purity auras, we're running Clarity, we're running Dread Banner to impale enemies, and we're also running Pride to increase our physical damage. On top of that, this build also has around 6,000 health. This will change with the final item, and I'll explain what the final chest piece I want to run on this is. But we're running 6,000 health. Our defensive stats are, we have a base level of armor that's at about 7,000, but this actually with Val Molten Shell and Fortify and everything else, this will then go up to about 15 to 16,000 armor, which gets us to about 88% damage reduction. On top of that, we're max capped on all of our resistances. We actually have 21% chaos resist as well, and we also have some pretty decent block stats as well, based off of the Guardian Ascendancy. Movement speed, we move quite quickly. Yeah, movement speed is good, so clear speed isn't bad. On top of that, obviously we're running Purity minions. The base stat modifier is about 400% damage increase on the minions, and we're running a life on hit build too. So, which is essentially using Cyclone as a life on hit tool, and we're maiming enemies as well. So what you would have seen in the B-roll is, at the very start of this video, is there's like a whole shitload of auras that go off the screen, and buffs and debuffs and whatever shit that's dropping. This build is pretty fucking crazy. It's at a stage where it could do Sirus if I weren't so lazy in my mapping and weren't delving so much. It could do Sirus with relative ease, given a minimum amount of skill. Obviously, that will become even easier with the changes I'm going to make in probably another update in the future for this build, which is really just going to be 6-linking this brass dome, because I currently don't have any currency because I'm spending every cent of it on everything. Anyway. Into the build guide we go, and yeah. Oh, and I should add, this build is geared around proccing poison on minions, and you'll also notice on my gloves I have a socketed gems are supported by level 16 poison on hit, which hits when my Cyclone procs on enemies, and on top of that I'm also running 18% minion damage on my Agony crawler as well. So my Agony crawler actually gets 200,000 DPS. I should add that these minions with this current gem setup get about 200,000 per sentinel, and we run 5 sentinels, and I'll explain how we do that without the helmet enchant as well. but it can go as far as 300 to 350,000 based on the POB that I'll put up as well in the description. Anyway, to the build guide we go. Okay, so for the armor and key uniques, more so this case, just the key armor items you'll need. The first thing we're going to run as an absolute 6-link endgame 6-link is the brass dome. The reason why we're running this is we take no extra damage from critical strikes. We do have reduced movement speed, but we also have 5.6 thousand armor base from this item. While it does reduce your health pool, it gives you an impossible amount of armor, which basically means you're just going to chug through T16 mobs, you're going to be able to fight the Minotaur, you're going to be able to do anything that you want, and basically never die. The next item that we're going to look at is our Stygian Vise, or in this case, our belt. In this case, my belt is simply just maximum life, some mana, chaos resist I've focused on, but you can use all resist if you want, and obviously a gem of your choosing that you want to socket into this belt. This is more or less for utility. It's also just a very useful belt to fill in any gaps that you need. So the next item that we'll talk about is the helm. So in I believe my POB, I'm using a Harlequin mask, but ideally we want an Elder influenced Eternal Burgeonet. This needs to have an Elder modifier to increase socketed gems by a level 18 minion damage gem. The reason why is we're going to be using this helm to buff up our Herald of Agony. You're going to want to also have high levels of health and also increase resistances, as well as if you can get a minion damage modifier for this, that's ideal as well. Also, in addition to this, you might also want to have the mana reservation modifier or an extra sentinel for whatever skill or for the Herald of Purity skill as well from the Eternal Lab. For our next item, we're going to look at the Titan Greaves. So our boots, essentially we want to have 30% movement speed, obviously. We want to have additional life. We also want to have any additional movement speed that we can get, and max cap any resistances that we can on our boots as well. Ideally, the enchant that you want will be something in the lines of increased attack speed or increased life regeneration. And finally, for our gauntlets, we want to have Goliath gauntlets. In the case of my POB, you definitely want to have these Elder influenced, and the reason being is you need the socketed gems are supported by a level 16 poison modifier for your Cyclone, which you're going to socket into this. Essentially, your Cyclone then is going to proc poison on hit, which is going to stack vile toxins, and that's going to increase our overall damage. The other thing that you'll also want on your gloves is obviously health, increased damage with poison, increased armor if you can get it, and any other increased resistances, and obviously some form of dexterity or something like that, because we're going to be really drawing a line on how difficult it is to get dex with this build. So for my main hand weapon, I'm actually using a Gemini Claw, and the reason why I'm using this is it's giving me 38 life gained on enemy hit and 14 life gained on hit as well, and this is going to synergize with our Cyclone, which is getting me, I think, 54 life on hit, so it's going to get me close to that 100 life on hit mark. I've also got modifiers on this Gemini Claw which increase my minion damage, also increase 30% chance poison on hit, and 49% increased damage with poisons. These are pretty key rolls, and obviously a 24% modifier for attack speed. Now, a lot of people will argue you should be using cold point daggers. I would argue using this is better, simply on the basis that while it might be nice to up your Herald of Purity gems, this is going to give you much more sustain when getting into bigger boss fights. It's also buffing up your minions regardless anyway with that modifier for minion damage. I would also, the improvements I would make currently to this, which I'm going to be looking at, will be obviously getting an influenced variant of this. I believe this actually is influenced variant. And also, and ideally an Elder influenced variant. And I'd also like to get a trigger socketed spell on use of a skill as my enchant on this as well. For my shield, I'm simply using just a Colossal Tower shield that gives me about 100 health plus, and maxes out all my resists. The minimum caveat being at least 1100 armor, and if possible, if you could kit this with an anticipation or something like that, that'll give you armor on block and also life on block or something of the nature as well. That's going to increase your survivability as well. So jewelry is pretty much the only real prerequisite uniques that you'll need in this build, and that being one of a Circle of Guilt. And what this will do is the modifiers we need on this is to reduce the mana reservation for Herald of Purity, and also Sentinel of Purity damage increase. Now this one's a little bit expensive and it'll cost you about 5x plus depending on what's available on the market. Took me a little bit to get mine, and I actually Diviner Orbed my my ring to get it to 40%. I completely lucked out on that, but that's, I think at the time, was about a 12x roll. The second ring that you'll need is a Circle of Nostalgia. This will basically pick this up to increase that chaos resistance while affected by Herald of Agony, and also have a 40% mana reduction to Herald of Agony. So that will again reduce that pooling of mana for that Herald of Agony will take up, considering it's essentially a technical 5-link based on its positioning of the gem and the helm. And we'll basically be able to have that up 24/7 as well, and then that's going to proc poison, and then your minions are going to do vile toxins on hit, and that's all going to synergize with your poison on hit built into your gloves as well, and also into the main hand weapon. Really easy one with this build. We're going to use the Fortress Covenant. This is just going to give us a huge increase in minion damage. Now we are using the new cluster jewels to pick up a whole heap of notables. But I'll explain that when I go through the tree, because obviously that's a little bit more technical and requires a little bit of crafting, but I'll also advise on the notables that you'll need on there when we look at the next section for the tree. So flask wise, 3 key flasks I'm using is just a Quicksilver flask with increased charge recovery and elemental resist on use. I'm also using a Basalt flask. I also have this gaining 1 charge when you're hit by an enemy, so basically if you get hit, you're going to continually regenerate charges. I'd advise getting that on as many flasks as possible. And I'm also using a Granite flask, essentially just to cap that armor out further, and then that will push my armor out further as Molten Shell procs and whatnot. Outside of that, I'm just using Eternal Flask with increased or instant recovery to keep my health pool sustained. Okay, so for the fun part, gems, sorry. So in the helm, you're going to be running Herald of Agony, Feeding Frenzy, Vicious Projectiles, and Pierce. This is also going to be buffed up with the added minion damage that you'll have rolled on your Elder Helm. For your chest, you'll be running Herald of Purity, Vile Toxins, Minion Damage, Brutality, Meat Shield, and merely physical damage. Now, while Brutality stops ailments or elemental damage and Chaos damage, doesn't stop poison damage, which means it synergizes with the use of Vile Toxins, so this actually increases the Herald of Purity damage while giving them a pretty high point physical damage as well. In the boots, we're going to be running a level 10 cast when damage taken setup with Val Molten Shell, and Phase Run and Convocation to keep your minions close to you at all times, in unison with Meat Shield that you're running on your chest regardless. This is going to keep your Herald of Agony minions next to you as well. Val Molten Shell is the best use here, and that's simply because it gives you a huge amount of armor, which is going to give you a much more sustainability. In your gloves, you're going to be running Cyclone, Fortify, Life Gain on Hit, and Maim. Essentially, as you Cyclone, and this is also buffed up by the level 16 Poison on Hit as well. So that's going to poison your enemies, and then that's also going to synergize with the Vile Toxins that's running on your Herald of Purity build as well. Now, with Cyclone, obviously you're going to be doing Life Gain on Hit. This is going to synergize with the Gemini Claw, and this is going to give you close to 100 Life Gain on Hit for everything that you spin around. Also on that, while you're hitting enemies, you're going to get the Fortify buff, which is going to increase your armor and your essentially your defense stats further. And then on top of that, while you're hitting enemies, we're also going to be applying a Maim as well, and that's going to really cause some damage on the on our enemies. On your first weapon, I'm just basically running these as additional buffs, as just a Carrion Golem and a Holy Relic. I am running a level 1 Clarity. and that's just to give me a little bit extra mana regeneration. For my second weapon, I'm running Flame Dash. I'm also running Pride. That's going to give me physical damage and increases to all my minions around me. And I'm also running Dread Banner. That's going to give my minions the ability to apply Impale, which means we're not only going to maim our enemies, we're going to poison our enemies, and we're going to impale our enemies with this build. Okay, so this is the fun part, the tree building part. So basically, we're going to start with the Templar nodes. I'm just doing this in PoE, obviously for simplicity. This tree is not too complicated. It's quite straightforward, but yeah, I'm going to show you how this works. So essentially, the first thing we're going to do, we're actually going to do a bit of an unorthodox thing. We're going to pick up the mana and life regeneration nodes, and simply that's because it's going to give us more sustainability. Sorry, I'll just move this mic out of the way a little bit. Okay, so we're going to go through to Sanctity, then we're going to go down, and we're going to go down, down, down. We're going to go prices are always down, and go to Born to Fight. We're going to go Heart of the Warrior, Warrior's Blood, and then we're going to come down and we're going to pick up these armor nodes, being Soul of Steel and also Bloodless. This is going to give us an increase to our HP pool. It's also going to increase our armor as well, quite significantly, and our physical damage reduction. This is going to give us our initial sustain. I like to get this out of the road too, because I know that it's it can be somewhat cumbersome applying, these nodes here. Being just like base strength nodes, they're not going to do anything special for you, and we want to basically minimize the amount of travel. This is the longest amount of travel in this build, I promise. So then we're going to come back up, and we're then going to go to the right, and we're going to pick up our dual socket here. Now we're going to put our Fortress Covenant here. The reason being is there's nothing here that Fortress Covenant can mess with, because the problem with Fortress Covenant is usually if you've got a notable passive within the radius, it's going to result in your minions taking an extra 20% damage, which isn't really good for your minions. So in this case, it doesn't affect anything. So that downside modifier isn't actually going to apply for our build in this circumstance. Then we're going to come down and we're going to pick up our life node cluster here. So once we've done that, we're going to go across. Obviously, I've picked up a Dex node here to pad out Dex a little bit as well, just to give us a bit more meatiness. Then I'm going to come down, pick up Resolute Technique. I'm going to pick up this dual socket, but I'm not going to do anything here yet. This will be the last thing that we do. So then I'll come down, I'll pick up Barbarism, and then we're pretty much done on this part of the tree. Next we'll want to come up, we want to pick up Devotion. That's going to increase our strength and also increase our non-curse aura effect as well by 3%. It's also going to give us health. We want to pick up this next dual socket up here. We want to pick up these the Righteous Army, the Spiritual Aid, and the Redemption nodes. This is going to buff our minions up quite substantially. Then we want to come up and we want to pick up Sovereignty. Make sure you pick up this increased aura effect as well, and then Purity of Flesh, and this is going to give you some more Chaos Resist on top of your existing Chaos Resist. So then we're going to come back across and come back to this, I'm going to call this the Crossroad node, or actually, apologies, we're going to come back up to Sanctity. Then we're going to move up and pick up Discipline and Training. We're going to get Retribution. I've picked up Precision to give me some more Dexterity, but there's no reason why you can't roll this on one of your gear items. And then you basically can save these two nodes. I've just been a little lazy here, but it also gives you increased movement speed and attack speed. So you're going to get 9% increased attack speed out of this as well. Accuracy doesn't really matter too much at this point because we're using we're using Resolute Technique, and that means that we always hit. It just means that we never deal crits, but we don't need to in this case. So anyway, we're going to come back up, we're going to pick up, we're going to move up to the nodes up to Sacrifice, and then we're going to pick up Spiritual Command. This is going to buff up our minion speed and also buff up our minion's life. Then we're going to come back up and pick Quick Recovery. That's going to give us a little bit of life regeneration, total maximum life, and also mana regeneration. And then we'll want to pick up Enduring Bond, and that's going to buff our minions up. Finally, we're going to pick up this little node socket here, or dual socket here, so we can apply another Ghastly Eye dual. So moving down to the key thing, the new changes we're going to look at is we want to get a large cluster dual, and now this one's very important. We need Call to the Slaughter, and we need the Rotten Claws notables. Call to the Slaughter will increase minion damage. It'll also, minions created recently will have increased attack speed, and they'll also move 30% faster. Now with Purity Sentinels, they are going to proc on hit or on death of enemies based on your Agony Crawler and everything else, and as you cyclone through. So you're always going to be creating new Sentinels of Purity. Now, they're always going to be buffed off of this notable, which makes them quite powerful. The next thing with Rotten Claws, that's going to give your essentially your minions additional 20% chance to impale on hit with attacks, which means not only are we running a Dread Banner, which increases impale there, we're also running an additional modifier for impale. So we're going to inevitably impale enemies, which means enemies are going to take increased damage, which is realistically where we want to be at. Now, is Rotten Claws absolutely necessary? No. You can get away with other minion, as long as it's a minion modifier, depending on what you want to do. Even if you can get something else of a different modifier to buff up defense, I would suggest that. I'm using Rotten Claws to give me more boss killing damage. Now, the next thing we're going to do in here is we're going to get a medium cluster jewel. And this one, there's pretty much no negotiation around what we can and can't do here. I picked this one up for about 50C. It needs to have heraldry, and it needs to have pure agony. And I'll explain why heraldry, both of these nodes are incredibly important to this build. So pure agony is going to give you 5 to maximum virulence, which is going to increase your damage with your Agony Crawler and your poison damage as an overall. It's also going to give you an additional purity, Sentinel of Purity. This is important because the only way that you can currently do this is with a helmet enchant. So this means that you can actually focus on getting the helmet enchant for 1 extra Sentinel of Purity, which means you can have 6 Sentinels running around, which is the most in this game has ever let you do with Sentinels of Purity. And Sentinels of Purity are quite powerful, and not to mention, you don't have to summon them. They automatically summon as you hit things. So as long as you're killing things, as long as you're hitting bosses, you'll always have your Sentinels of Purity up and going, which means if you got 6 of those fuckers running around, they'll be doing some crazy mob damage. This node also gives you 20% increased damage for minions while you're affected by a Herald as well. So as long as you've got your Herald up, and you will because you're running Herald of Purity and Agony, you're always going to be doing damage. For heraldry, this is yet another really important one. It's going to increase your herald buffs on you, but it's going to decrease both of your heralds' mana reservation by 10%, and this is what lets us run Pride. And Pride increases our damage quite vastly, especially with the nature of this build. And previously, the only way that you could really achieve this was to get the helmet enchant, either min and max your gear, which would take ages, and get amulet and helm rolls to with elder bases, or I think it's elder bases, or it's shaper bases to have mana reservation reduction, or you would have the helmet enchant from lab, which quite frankly is really difficult to get, but considering the amount of rolls that you can get, so you're just chancing that. This is a much more structured approach to being able to achieve that without having to spend 30,000 hours in lab trying to get that one bloody enchant for Herald of Purity. So definitely critical in order to be able to run everything in this build. I think I have excess amount of mana for Cyclone, which is about 58 mana, which is perfect because I can sustain that with my Gemini Claw and the regen that I do have. So it's slim pickings, but it works like a dream. Lastly, I've just got a Ghastly Jewel in here to increase my physical damage by minions and also give me some more health and resist and whatnot to max that out. That's essentially what we're doing with the new nodes. They're really interesting. There's a lot of different combinations you can run. This is the best combination I've been able to find so far, but by all means, try different things. These minor nodes too give you 10% increased minion damage. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of these. So you've got 80% increased minion damage in this cluster alone, which is why using this Grave Pact is actually completely redundant if you're running this. And this is definitely worth the investment. This is just like a huge cluster of minion damage fuck off nodes, which is why you would have seen the B-roll killing Sirus first time over at I think Awaken at level 4 is essentially a piece of cake for this build. And also on that we will have the Ascendancy. I'll just navigate to the Ascendancies. Okay, so this is obviously a Guardian. So the first thing we want to pick up is our Radiant Crusade. This is going to give us elemental resist, and also while there are 5 enemies nearby, you're going to have Onslaught, which means you're always going to have Onslaught with 5 Sentinels of Purity and also an Agony Crawler. And also while there's at least one enemy nearby, one ally nearby, you and allies will do 10% increased damage straight away. So you've got a buff there automatically. Next, we're going to pick up Unwavering Crusade, which means nearby allies get a 30% increased damage buff, 15% increased attack, cast, and movement speed, and they have 30% increased area of effect. This is going to buff up your Crusader Slam, so you're going to see your Sentinel of Purity Crusader Slam, which means those bastards are going to be charging everything, and it's going to be crazy. Also, nearby allies intimidate enemies for 4 seconds on hit, and they unnerve enemies for 4 seconds on hit as well. So that's also going to increase your damage to enemies. The next node you're going to pick up is going to be Bastion of Hope. This is going to give you 50% chance to block attack damage for 2 seconds every 5 seconds. And if you've blocked in the last 10 seconds, you and your nearby allies cannot be stunned. So this is going to essentially give you a good mitigator for stun. It's also going to increase your block attack damage, chance to block attack damage for minions, and also spell block. That's going to apply less because we're not really casting spells with this build. Finally, you're going to get Harmony of Purpose, and this is going to essentially give you a constant, steady flow of 3 endurance charges, 3 frenzy charges, and 3 power charges. So you're going to have 9 base charges at all times, and this is going to increase damage reduction, increase mana regeneration, increase attack and movement speed, etc., etc. It's basically going to make you a one-man army essentially, as is the Guardian is, and I've found this league, is maybe one of the best equipped classes in this entire game. And before, I thought this was a really shit. Quite frankly, I didn't take the Guardian seriously, and now I've played it, I'm like, oh my god, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. Anyway, this build tree will be in the POB. And yeah, so if you've got any questions or whatnot, or if you want to really tinker with this tree and do some wicked and wild stuff to it, then by all means go crazy. This tree is you know, I'm pretty confident, pretty happy with this tree right now where it is. I don't really think there's a lot I can really do from this point with this tree, but mean to say, some crazy motherfucker will think of something. Anyway, I'll take it over to the final part of the video. Okay, so I hope this build guide helps you with your Herald of Purity / Herald of Agony ways. Yeah, the POB will be in the description. I'll try and provide any other details that you might need as I upload and people comment and whatnot. But yeah, if you like this video, if it helps you, again, my apologies, this video is a little bit long, but there's a lot of stuff that goes into this build that is a little tedious and requires a little bit of understanding. But yeah, if you like this video, if it helps you, if it gives you the information you need, if the POB is good, you know, like and sub and support the channel. And if you don't like this video, well, you don't like this video, you can downvote or whatever it's called, dislike this video all you want. But yeah, and yeah, until next time, thanks for watching, and bye.